Detroit Future City is expanding its efforts to drive change in the city of Detroit. The nonprofit has added a new department that's called the Center for Equity, Engagement, and Research. The goal is to advance economic equity in Detroit and the surrounding region by using extensive research and data. Joining me now are Anika Goss, who is Executive Director of Detroit Future City, and Wendy Lewis Jackson from the Kresge Foundation, which is providing funding along with the Hudson Weber Foundation. Thanks to both of you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so talk about the role that you hope this new center will play. This is a conversation that you and I have had before here on American Black Journal, and a conversation a lot of people are having in Detroit.
Yes.
How do we make sure that everybody has opportunity to participate in the things that are happening?
Yeah.
What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, one of the main things that we hope to accomplish by this is not only having really clear and accessible data and information, but we also want Detroiters to be able to understand how decisions are made in Detroit. So the data, the same data that policymakers and investors are using to make major decisions, Detroiters need to understand that data as well. We also are hoping to also then influence how investments are made in Detroit. Some of the inequities that are happening right now in Detroit feel intractable. The job disparity is one example.
Yeah.
And the wage disparity, the same, which is what we've talked about before, that you could be a Detroiter live with the same degree and the same tenure in job and still make less
money
than your suburban counterpart. How do you fix that? Feels really, really challenging. And unless we actually stay on that issue, on that data point, we won't be able to really get to how we fix it.
Yeah. So how do you make sure then Detroiters are getting that information, and more importantly, maybe, how do you make sure that policymakers are getting that information so they can change some of these things?
Right. So part of the new center will give us the capacity to be able to publish more, to have more staff just designated on research and publications and getting that word out, and the engagement piece. So having a really strategic engagement piece for how we actually meet with the community, helping them understand so that they don't have to just come for us and pick up our publication. We're actually going out and having conversations about the data that's available.
Yeah. Wendy, talk about Kresge's interest here. Kresge and Hudson Weber, which I should also say, I sit on the board of Hudson Weber. But talk about the interest of philanthropy in this question of equity. That's a turn a little bit from some of the work that philanthropy has been doing in Detroit for a long time.
Yeah, so Kresge has been a part of a consortium of funders, local and national, that have been supporting Detroit Future City through all of its various phases, from planning to the release of the strategic framework and to now this exciting agenda with the launch of the new center. And so I think it mirrors obviously the pivots and shifts that Detroit and this region have gone through as it starts to address questions of equity. But for Kresge specifically, within our Detroit program, we've identified racial equity in particular as an important strategic shift, if you will, for how we're going to be looking at our investments going forward in the city. And a lot of that comes from our increased focus on neighborhood revitalization and redevelopment in Detroit specifically.
The racial equity question is something that again, a lot of people seem very aware of. Philanthropy has played an important role in renewing interest and investment in the city, and in some ways, that interest and investment has widened the gap between those who have and have not. So I guess it's an extra challenge then to think about, okay, well, we did these things that really made a difference. How do we make sure that everybody catches up and benefits from it?
Yeah, I think, because of where Detroit was at, particularly after the bankruptcy and needing that economic jumpstart, that economic boost. And a lot of those investments went into, quite candidly, the core of the city. Now that philanthropy and others, the city itself, city government itself, is looking more at what's needed to really bridge the gap and ensure that neighborhoods benefit from new investment and continued investment. This equity agenda is, front and center and has taken a significant priority.
Yeah. How does this dovetail with the other work that Detroit Future City is involved in?
Well, we really believe that the economic health of a city is directly related to environmental health. So what kind of neighborhood are you living in, and how you are able to manage water in your home, how you're able to live in the community around you, that's where there's productive land as opposed to vacancy and blight. It has a direct economic impact on you as even a renter or property owner. And those are the things that we're already working on with our environmental work and our sustainability work, as well as our community and economic development work. Having this focus of equity and this integration of the data really allows us to actually go much deeper in our existing work.
So when you say the word equity, I think it depends on who you're talking to, sort of what they think about what that word actually means. And I guess what I'm getting at is like specifically defining it, right? What does that look like, and how do you measure? I mean, these are the questions that obviously you'll be answering at the center, but I'm not sure that everybody necessarily agrees or understands what those things are.
So I'll tell you how we see it. I agree that people might see it differently. I think Policy Link and Angela Glover Blackwell, who really coined that term, would say it's really up to you to define it, what you really feel like equity is. However, what we really want to do at Detroit Future City is focus on inclusive growth for everyone in Detroit and creating economic opportunity for everyone in Detroit. And not being afraid to focus on the racial inequities that exist right now that have economic repercussions for the city in its entirety.
The fear of confronting that racial question, I think, is one of the things I was getting at there with that question is, some people will say, well, equity, why does it have to be about race, right? Isn't it more about economics, or isn't it more about one region versus another? But here, especially, it's impossible to talk about that question without.
We're a city that's 80% African American, and 14% Latinx. So whether you like it or not, the general you, we are going to talk about race, because even if we are, even if the percentage of is still a majority minority city, the majority minorities that are living here are not economically viable and healthy. They're not prosperous, and we're not organized right now in Detroit for African Americans and Hispanics to be prosperous. And in other conversations we've had, what ends up happening is that we'll see Black households make more money and then move. And I think the goal for everyone in Detroit is that Detroit should be a place where you can be economically viable and prosperous. So then we need to reduce the racial gap and the racial and economic inequities that keep families from choosing Detroit as their home.
Wendy, how does philanthropy measure success for this kind of question? What does that look like?
I think Detroit Future City is going to play obviously an important role in defining success through two ways. First of all, it's just getting the data set that we need to make good and successful decisions. And from some of the data that Detroit Future City has already collected and produced, whether it's the African American Middle Class Report, the Detroit Reinvestment Index, this issue of equity is a theme that is already present, and they can build on with the development of the new center. The second issue is going to be around how is the community, Detroit and the region, engaged in looking at this data, understanding this data, and applying this data. And so those are really the two ways primarily that philanthropy can be most involved and resource this kind of work and this kind of conversation.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to the work and hopefully the progress that comes from doing the work. Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you
for having us.